like I met Ben probably even a year prior to that, and I had some back and forth, just like local networking as I worked for a different gym at the time, and I actually worked for a physical therapist when I met him. And he had his own thing. And we exchanged some things very early on, just kind of back and forth on different ideas. Like myself and the girl I was working with at the time kind of introduced him to some of the gymnastics stuff and the flexibility work. And then he was showing us some more of the more intimate Poliquin stuff that you can't really find in his books and in his courses. Like, it's more stuff that you would have learned from him if you would have gone and trained with him in person. And so just shared kind of like, industry stuff back and forth. And then I trained out of his gym probably a couple days a week, even when I was working at the other gym, because it was so heavily gymnastics based. We didn't really have a lot for weight training, and I still like doing that. So I would train at his gym a couple days a week, mostly for lower body and do weights, and then upper body for the gymnastics stuff at my place. And basically just got into that because he was insanely impressed by my range of motion and the things that I was able to accomplish having that level of flexibility that obviously he didn't have a lot of experience with, because one, a lot of guys, especially my size, don't have that. And two, it's still not something that's like commonly taught. And even more so, it's commonly taught that it's like a bad quality to have. So it was an interesting exchange initially, but now, I mean, everything's good. We had typical business shit, there was obviously a falling out towards the latter part of me leaving and the other guys leaving. Decisions were made and whatever. And, things that I didn't necessarily agree with, and I've been pretty vocal about. But in recent time, now we've kind of just squashed all that and diminished it, and just, I've kind of just come to the point where it is what it is, and just move on. And I'm doing my own thing, and really that's kind of where we sit now. He's actually in town, and we've talked back and forth about doing some things together, just haven't got around to it or whatever. And he's actually training at Derek's gym, so while he's in town. And yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like a friendly thing now, but no real, commitments or contributions to anything outside of just being buds, I guess.
Yeah. Was it more?
I feel like that's how guys are. Guys, it's like women will just like stay mad forever and just like hold a chip on their shoulder forever. And guys, it's like schoolyard. You'll talk shit to each other for a little while, and then you'll get in a fist fight, and then you're like that, you're friends again. It's just like I think it's just kind of how guys are. So
yeah, but it wasn't. I don't want to like pry into personal stuff, but it wasn't a disagreement with regards to like thoughts on training or anything like that. It was more the business side of things.
Yeah, fortunately, there was never really a lot of disagreement necessarily in the actual training. I think things started getting delivered and presented and marketed in a way that I didn't think was tasteful or honest, or just a bit sensationalized, which I understand. Like, a lot of people, you kind of have to do that for marketing. I mean, I guess if that's the mindset that you have, that's always going to be a response. Like, I still think that you can do things with honesty and integrity, and just be a little bit more straightforward about your methods and how you came to the conclusions on things. I'm not the kind of individual that likes to say, you should do this because I did it and it worked for me. I don't think that's a bad reason to do something, but I think you should at least try to understand why it did work for you. And, in the hierarchy of like evidence and research, anecdotal always comes first, right? Like we have to do something first, and we have to show that it works, and then generally replicate that over and over and over. And then later we try to understand, why did that work? So a lot of times, like, research doesn't tell us that things work. They tell us why they work. And I just think marketing things in that sort of way is just not how I like to do things. And it's not my company. It's not my business. So ultimately, if there was any sort of disagreements there, I either have to accept it and just move on with it, or let it be known that I don't agree with it, and they can decide to do what they want to do with it. And then obviously, like, but in terms of training, like, I think Ben brings a lot to the table. I mean, I think he breaks a lot of the sort of this, like, still like really outdated. Like there's dogma, and then there's just like outdated dogma, right? Of like going knees over toes and things like that. And so I think that for a lot of people, he's kind of dissipated that fear and that information of people. Like if you're having a problem with your knees, obviously it can be many factors, but one of those factors can definitely be that you just have weak knees. So you need to train them, you know? But yeah, it was never really a training issue at all. In fact, the whole 3 years was like, it was probably some of the best 3 years of just my career. And we had a lot of fun, and it was a good group. And I think in the initial stages of just having the group and having the brand and coming into work every day and having that environment, and it was a very creative environment, and everyone came and worked hard and contributed and had something to bring to the table. You know, I don't think you can really ask for much more than that. I just think some things just don't work out, and you just have to accept it and move on.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've all done. You know?
Yeah, I think he's done a good job. Like, I think he's definitely broken down some barriers there, and brought a message to the masses and stuff. I see him. I actually made a mistake, like, on a podcast recently, where I try not to be negative about anything really, like in terms of people or anything like that. I said something slightly negative and about him, and I regret it. But it wasn't like people are like going to be like searching for this podcast. It wasn't anything big or anything like that. But when I came off it, I was like, shit, like I shouldn't have actually name dropped him there or anything like that. And it wasn't with regards to training, but like I think a lot of people are negative. Basically, what I'm trying to say is they're negative because they're jealous of him and his success. That is very clearly obvious to me. But I don't mind people like picking apart some of the principles and stuff like that if they disagree with them in a measured and logical way. But yeah, I don't want to fall into the trap of being negative about someone who's definitely contributed more than he's taken away from the industry, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand, like, and it's not to say that he's ever had bad intentions with anything, because I knowing from working with him, that's never been the case. I just think ignorance can sort of make it seem like that's what's happening, right? And we all are ignorant about certain things, you know what I mean? And again, it's, you know, if somebody comes to me, and it's funny because we might segue into something from this conversation, but when you build your likeness around a certain system, and somebody, you know, when you make a claim, the burden of proof is on you, right? Like that's how it works. So if I were to assert some claim, then if somebody questions that claim, it's on me to provide proof as to how I came to that conclusion and was able to assert that statement, right? And I think that the issue that people have is not with necessarily him or the methods. It's his inability to come to the table and bear the burden of proof when it comes to some of the things that he talks about, whether it's because he doesn't actually understand it. And again, sometimes like that's okay, right? Like fitness and a lot of things have progressed rapidly in this world because, and we didn't really understand why it was the way it was initially. And so I think that's the issue that a lot of people have, right? Is it's like, and just the lack of context and nuance sometimes, yeah. Right? Yeah. And you know, working online, it is hard to like add context to everything, but, and you know, like these big one-liners and these statements, like that's what draws a lot of attention. So I think you just have to be careful of getting caught in the trap and just be willing to provide context, but also just be willing to bear the burden of proof when it's asked. And I think the attitude historically has been block people, delete people. You know, I think there's a difference between just being negative and hating and then just genuinely like challenging an idea because there are holes in the idea that, you know, are that are kind of falling apart. And I think that's the main issue.